The candles in the long gallery of Ashford House were counted twice a night, and Mary Whitlock knew, because she had been the one to count them, since Michaelmas. 64 in the sconces along the eastern wall, 18 more in the great chandelier above the supper table, and 4 apiece in the branched holders that the dowager insisted upon at each corner of the room for what she called atmosphere and Mary privately called vanity. She was counting them now on her fingers behind her back, while Lady Ravenshaw's daughter said something clever at her expense, and the whole table laughed. "One does wonder," Miss Ravenshaw was saying in that airy manner, "girls of her sort learn before they can properly walk, whether the cook's ambitions have quite exceeded her means. Look at the poor creature. She has been carrying that tureen for a full minute, and she has not moved 3 paces. The tureen was heavy. Mary had lifted heavier. What slowed her was the space between chairs, which had been arranged with the fashionable closeness the dowager preferred, and which required her, a large woman, to turn sideways and wait for a gentleman to shift his elbow. She waited now. Tureen, steady, back straight. Eyes on the middle distance where she had learned to send them when a room decided to remark on her body. "Perhaps," said another voice, a woman's, sweet as spoiled honey, "we ought to have the soup passed to her, rather than the other way about." The laughter this time was smaller and more careful, because it was Lady Ashford who had spoken, and Lady Ashford's cruelties were understood to be the entertainment of the evening, rather than accidents anyone need pretend to soften. Mary set the tureen upon the sideboard. Her hand did not shake. She had trained it long ago not to. She noticed the smudge of soot on her own left knuckle. She noticed, too, the way the fire in the far hearth was burning low, and made a small mental note to see to it before the room grew cool. She noticed that the youngest of the Ravenshaw girls had eaten nothing, and that the elderly Mrs. Fairbrother, who was deaf in her left ear, had been seated on the wrong side of Colonel Peake, and was drifting into loneliness. Mary noticed all of it without meaning to. She had noticed things all her life. It was, she sometimes thought grimly, the only skill her father had left her, along with his debts. "Whitlock," said the dowager, without turning her head. "The fire." "Yes, my lady." She crossed the room with her steady, unhurried tread. Behind her someone whispered something about elephants and a governess, and someone else stifled a laugh, and Mary knelt at the hearth and set the poker among the coals with the careful attention of a woman who had made herself, over 8 long years in this house, into a piece of the furniture no one saw except when it was needed. A poor gentlewoman with opinions is a luxury no household can afford. Her aunt had told her the year she came here, a widow at 23 and unclaimed by anyone in the world. Mary had kept the lesson. The coals brightened. The room, warmed, resumed its cruelty on a different subject. She was permitted to eat afterwards in the housekeeper's parlor with Mrs. Poole, who never ate with her either, but arranged it so that a plate found its way there, while Mary sat mending a tear in the dowager's shawl. The kitchen fire was low. Mrs. Poole, who was old and had watched 3 generations of Ashford girls call Mary names in 3 generations of fashionable phrases, said nothing for a long time. Then, without lifting her eyes from her ledger, she said, "There was a man came asking about you today." Mary looked up. "What sort of man?" "A solicitor's clerk. By the cut of him from the north. He would not leave a name. He wanted to know if a Mrs. Whitlock, widow of Josiah Whitlock, still resided at Ashford House. I told him yes. He asked if you was well, and I told him yes to that also, though the Lord knows why I bothered." "From the north," Mary said. "Yorkshire by his tongue." Mrs. Poole turned a page. "You take care, girl. Men do not come asking after women like us for our own good." Mary did not sleep that night. She lay in the narrow bed under the eaves, and listened to the house cool around her, and she thought about a name spoken by a stranger from a county she had never seen, and about how her father had died with his affairs in such disarray that even now, 12 years on, she could not be certain what he had owed and to whom, or what, if anything, might yet be owed to her. There had been talk once at his funeral of a cousin in the north. There had been a woman in mourning she had not been permitted to speak to. There had been an envelope her aunt had taken from the mantelpiece and put in a drawer, and a drawer that was locked when Mary went looking a week later. But men are slow, child, and lawyers slower still, and grief makes fools of the cleverest of us. Mary had learned not to ask. She rose at 5 as she always did, and did not think of it again. She did not know. That gray morning, that at an inn in a market town 6 miles to the south a man had already been awake for 2 hours, reading a letter for the 3rd time, and that the letter concerned her. He was a tall man. That was what the innkeeper's wife would say afterwards when asked. Tall, and dressed in black, and one of those gentlemen who did not raise his voice because he did not need to. His boots were fine, but not new. His gloves he had set beside him on the table without ceremony. He drank his coffee without sugar, and read the letter, and read it again, and folded it and put it inside his coat. The letter was from his solicitor. It informed His Grace the Duke of Harrowmere that a codicil to the will of the late Sir Thomas Vane of Vane Hall, executed in the year before Sir Thomas's death, and lodged in the office of a country attorney in a market town in Berkshire, had been recovered at last after a decade of what could only be described as deliberate obstruction. The codicil named as sole beneficiary of the entailed portion of Sir Thomas's estate. A considerable portion, comprising a house in Yorkshire, 3 farms, and an income of some £1,100 a year. His natural daughter, Mary Ann, born of a woman he had loved and had not been permitted to marry, and raised under the surname of her stepfather, Josiah Whitlock. The codicil, further named as executor and guardian of her interests, until such time as she should marry or reach the age of 30, the head of the neighboring house of Harrowmere, whose father had been Sir Thomas's closest friend. The letter observed that His Grace was now, whether he wished it or not, that man. It observed further that the missing woman had been located in the household of Lady Ashford, in circumstances the solicitor described as regrettable. And it observed, in a final paragraph the Duke had read 4 times over, that a Mr. Silas Marwood, cousin to the deceased and current occupant of Vane Hall, had petitioned the court to have the codicil declared invalid on grounds of forgery, and that the hearing was set for the last day of March. Nathaniel Ashcombe, 7th Duke of Harrowmere, folded the letter a final time. It was the 9th of March. He had 3 weeks. He had not slept properly since November, when the fever had taken his sister's husband, and left his sister's small son in his care. And his sister's small son had stopped speaking. He had not laughed in longer. He had a house in the north that was cold in every room save the nursery, and a boy of 6, who sat by the window all day with his fingers on the glass, and a scheme of enemies waiting patiently to prove him unfit as guardian of anything at all. He had no wife, he had no time. He had, God help him, a girl to find, a hearing to win, and now a moral obligation older than his title. He set 2 coins on the table and rose. "I shall need a carriage to Ashford House," he told the innkeeper's wife. Within the hour, she stared at him. "To Ashford, your Grace?" "To Ashford." He was announced at 11 in the yellow drawing-room, and Lady Ashford, who had not been expecting anyone, and least of all a Duke of the North, whose name she had heard perhaps twice in her life, and only in connection with a scandal she could no longer quite remember, rose to receive him in a flutter of astonishment she took no pains to conceal. The dowager was sent for. The dowager arrived. Refreshments were pressed. He declined them. "I am afraid," he said, "my business is with one of your household." "With one of my—" The dowager's eyes narrowed a fraction. "With my daughters." "Your Grace, both are at their music." "Not your daughters." Then whom? A Mrs. Whitlock. There was a silence so exact that Mary, passing in the corridor with a basket of linen for the still room, heard her own name pronounced by a voice she did not know, and stopped in place as though a hand had closed on her shoulder. "Whitlock," said the dowager slowly. "You mean the girl who does our accounts?" "I mean," said the Duke, in a tone entirely without emphasis, "the daughter of the late Sir Thomas Vane." Mary, in the corridor, set the basket down without knowing that she had done so. The linens spilled at her feet. "The daughter of," Lady Ashford began, and then stopped, because the dowager had gone very still, and because the Duke had turned his head very slightly, and was regarding them both with the patience of a man who had already decided what the answer to his question would be. "Send her in," he said. "Please." She was fetched. A footman came for her in the corridor and looked at her strangely, as though her face had changed since breakfast, and Mary followed him to the drawing-room with her hands very quiet at her sides, and her heart doing something she could not put a name to. She stopped at the threshold. She looked at the Duke. He was not what she had expected. She had expected. She did not know what she had expected. Ceremony, perhaps. Cruelty of a new and northern variety. What she saw was a man of perhaps 35, tall, black-coated, unornamented, with a face that had been handsome once and was now something harder to describe, and gray eyes that fixed upon her the moment she stepped through the door, with an attention so complete she felt it as a pressure against her skin. He did not look at her body. She noticed that first. He looked at her face, and then at her hands, and then at her face again, and something in his own face altered. She could not tell whether it was recognition or surprise, or the small private satisfaction of a man whose suspicion had been confirmed. "Mrs. Whitlock," he said, "Your Grace. My name is Ashcombe. I am the Duke of Harrowmere. I have ridden 3 days to find you." Behind her, Lady Ashford made a small strangled sound. "I do not know you, sir," Mary said quietly. "You would not. But I knew your father." The room, which had been silent, became more silent. Mary's hands, at her sides, were shaking very slightly. She was aware of the shaking as of a thing happening to someone else. "My father," she said, "was Josiah Whitlock, sir, of the linen trade." "Your father," said the Duke, without unkindness, "was Sir Thomas Vane of Vane Hall in the North Riding of Yorkshire. Josiah Whitlock was your mother's husband, and a good man, and he raised you as his own, and he did you a kindness in that, but he was not your father. Sir Thomas was." "Your Grace," said the dowager, recovering her voice, "if this is some sort of—" "It is not." He did not look at her. He looked at Mary. "There is a codicil, Mrs. Whitlock. It has been kept from you for 12 years. It leaves to you an estate in the north, considerable in scale, and it names me as your executor and guardian until you shall marry or come to your 30th year, whichever shall come first. I am here to inform you of its existence, and to inform you that a man has petitioned to have it declared a forgery, and that the hearing is set for the last day of March, and that the estate you have never seen and the name you have never carried are both at present in danger of being taken from you before you have even understood you possess them." Mary did not move. She could hear, very distantly, the sound of the great hall clock striking the quarter. She could feel the smudge of ink on her right forefinger, where she had made an entry in the household ledger not 2 hours before. She could see, without looking at her, that Lady Ashford's mouth had opened and closed twice, and had settled at last into an expression of pure, focused calculation. "How much," said Lady Ashford, "would this estate be worth?" The Duke turned his head, then he looked at Lady Ashford. For what could not have been more than 3 seconds. When he looked back at Mary, his voice was, if anything, gentler. "I should like to speak with Mrs. Whitlock privately," he said, "if she will consent to it." I consent, Mary said. She said it before she knew she meant to. She said it in the voice she used when she was setting terms in the servants' hall. Plain, unhurried, final. She saw the Duke's eyes narrow very slightly, and she understood that he had heard something in the voice he had not been expecting to hear, and that he was in his careful northern way reconsidering her. Lady Ashford was less pleased. In my drawing-room, she began. I hardly think. In the garden, said Mary. If your grace will permit, it is not cold. It was cold. She wanted it cold. She wanted air and distance and no dowager's ear behind a door, and she wanted, God help her, a moment to understand whether the ground she had walked on since childhood was ground at all. Bort. They walked out beneath the yew arch into the small ornamental garden that Lady Ashford was proud of and never visited. The sky was the color of pewter. Mary's shawl was thin. She had not stopped to fetch a better one, and she would not do so. Now she would not begin this by keeping a duke waiting. He did not speak at first. He walked beside her at her pace, not his, which she noticed, and did not comment upon. When they were far enough from the house that no window overlooked them, he stopped and turned to her, and said, I owe you the whole story. I will tell it briefly. You may ask what you like, please, she said. Your mother, Anne Devereux, was the daughter of a country parson in the North Riding. She was 17 when she met Sir Thomas Vane. He was 32 and a widower with no children. They loved one another. His family, an older sister, and a cousin, the Silas Marwood, who is now trying to take from you what is yours, refused the match, on the grounds that she was without fortune. Sir Thomas was a weaker man than he ought to have been. He allowed himself to be persuaded to break the engagement. Your mother left Yorkshire in secret carrying you, and she married Josiah Whitlock in a village in Kent 6 months later. Whitlock knew. He married her knowingly and kindly. He gave you his name, because it was the name that would protect you. Sir Thomas did not know of your birth for 8 years. When he learned of it, from a letter your mother wrote him upon Whitlock's death, he did what he could. He settled money on your mother. You may not have known this. The sums were small and disguised. He did not attempt to see you, because your mother forbade it, and because he understood, at last, that he had lost the right. When your mother died 4 years later, he made his will. When his own health failed him, 10 years after, he added a codicil. He named you. He named the estate. He named my father as your guardian, because my father had been the only man who had spoken to him honestly about the whole affair. My father died 2 years before Sir Thomas. The duty passed to me. Mary said nothing for a long moment. She was looking at a rose bush that had been pruned badly the previous autumn and would flower poorly in the summer to come. She noticed this. Why now? She said. Why has it taken 12 years? Because your cousin Marwood is a patient man and a careful thief. He suppressed the codicil at the time of Sir Thomas's death. He installed himself at Vane Hall as trustee for what he claimed was an intestate estate. He has drawn its income for a decade. 2 months ago, a clerk in the country attorney's office in Berkshire discovered the codicil in a bundle of unfiled papers, having been misplaced there by a junior partner who is now dead. The clerk wrote to me. I wrote to my own solicitor. My solicitor made enquiries. And here I am. And Marwood has petitioned the court. He asserts the codicil is a forgery, that Sir Thomas was not of sound mind, and that in any case no such daughter exists. If he wins, the estate remains with him. If he loses, it comes to you. And you, I beg your pardon? You are named as my guardian. What do you gain? He looked at her a long time before he answered. She noticed that he did not flinch from the question, and she noticed that he did not smile at it either. I gain nothing of the estate, Mrs. Whitlock. Not a farthing. My interest in this matter is a duty inherited from my father, and a small personal shame that I did not know sooner what he had promised. I am not here to court you. I am not here to marry you. I am here to see you named and settled and safe, and then to withdraw. She almost laughed. She caught it before it escaped her. Forgive me, she said. It is only that in my experience, sir, no one has ever come to see me safe. He did not answer. He looked, for the first time since he had entered the drawing-room, as though he had been struck. There is a further matter, he said after a pause. I will lay it out plainly, and you will take of it what you like. I am a widower. My sister and her husband died of the fever within a week of one another in November past. Their son, my nephew, is now in my care. He is 6 years old. He has not spoken since his mother's funeral. I have a house in the north that is cold in every room, and a boy who sits by the window and will not eat, and a set of trustees who have begun to ask whether a bachelor duke is a proper guardian for a small, silent child. I have 3 weeks to establish before the court that you exist, that the codicil is genuine, and that Marwood is a liar. To do that, I must bring you north, into my household, under my protection. This will cause talk. Ashford House will make certain of it. The simplest, the cleanest way to silence the talk and to strengthen your standing before the court is, for us, to marry before the hearing. Not for love, for safety. Yours and mine and the boys. Mary was quiet. He waited. You have 3 weeks, she said at last. I have 3 weeks. And you propose that I marry you within them. I propose that we marry within one. There is a license I can obtain in London by Thursday. A ceremony can be quiet, it need not be a spectacle. She looked at him. She saw for the first time that his hands, clasped behind his back, were closed very tightly. She saw the small muscle at the corner of his jaw. She saw a man not accustomed to asking for anything from anyone, asking now, and hating that he must, and doing it anyway because a child in a house in the north was not eating. I will tell you my conditions, she said. He inclined his head. Before I answer anything, I will hear the whole story. From your solicitor, in your presence, and I will read the codicil with my own eyes. I do not bargain with half a story. Agreed. If we marry, I will not enter your house as decoration, and I will not be treated as hired help in a duchess's title. I will have authority in your nursery and in your household in all matters relating to the child's welfare. I will not defer to housekeepers or nurses or trustees on questions I judge to be mine. Agreed. You will not lie to me, not by omission and not by kindness. If you dislike a thing I have done, you will say so. If you regret this bargain, you will say so. I will not be managed, agreed. You will not perform an affection you do not feel, and you will not require me to perform one either. I will not have a house made false by kindness, pretended. If we come to any warmth between us, it will be a real warmth. If we do not, we will be civil and useful to one another, and that will be enough. He was looking at her now with an intensity that she felt as a heat at the base of her throat. She did not look away. Agreed, he said, and then more quietly, Mrs. Whitlock, those are the terms of a woman who has been managed too often. I will keep them. There is one more. Yes. The boy. Whatever comes of the court and the codicil in Vane Hall, I will not be brought into his life on a pretense. If I become anything to him, it will be by his choosing and by his time. His mother is not to be erased. Do I make myself understood? He did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice had gone lower than it had been. You make yourself understood entirely, she nodded. Once she looked at the badly pruned rose. She said without looking at him, Then I shall wish to see the codicil, sir, as soon as it can be arranged tomorrow. My solicitor is at the inn. I will bring him. Very well. They stood a moment longer. She discovered she had nothing more to say, and no idea how one concluded such a conversation, and she was grateful that he seemed to have the same trouble and that neither of them tried to soften it. At last he said, "Mrs. Whitlock." "Thank you." "For what, your grace? For not asking me to leave?" She looked at him then. He was, she thought, the loneliest man she had ever seen. "Tomorrow, sir," she said, and she went back into the house. Lady Ashford was waiting in the hall. Her face had the strange, pinched expression of a woman calculating an escape from a mistake she had not yet realized was hers. "Mary," she said. She had never called her Mary. It had always been Whitlock. "Mary, dear, whatever that man has told you, he has told me who my father was." "My lady? And what was left me? And what has been taken?" "I believed him, my lady, and tomorrow I shall read the papers. Mary, I insist you consider a duke from the north, of whom none of us has ever heard so much as a Lady Ashford." Mary set down her shawl. She did it carefully. "I have kept your ledgers for 8 years. I have counted your candles. I have sat at your table and heard your daughters make sport of my body, and I have said nothing. Because a poor gentlewoman with opinions is a luxury no household can afford, and I understood the terms of my keeping. But I am not, it seems, quite so poor as I was this morning, and the terms have altered. I shall be leaving your house within the week. I shall pack tonight. I will thank you for the shelter, my lady, and I will not thank you for the manner of it. And we shall not speak of any of it again." She turned and went up the stairs. Behind her, in the drawing-room, Miss Ravenshaw, who had crept back to listen at the door, said in an entirely different voice, "The fat one?" "Truly the fat one." And Lady Ashford, whose color had gone from white to red, hissed at her to be quiet. Mary, halfway up the stair, heard the phrase and did not stop. She thought of a room full of laughter and a tureen not yet set down. She thought of her mother, whom she remembered only faintly, and of a man in Yorkshire she had never met, and would now never meet, who had loved her mother, and been persuaded to be a coward, and had tried in a small paper way to be less of one at the end. The fat one. Truly, the fat one. She kept climbing, and pause. The solicitor arrived the next morning as promised, and the codicil was as promised. And by Thursday afternoon a license had been obtained, and by Saturday morning Mary Whitlock stood in a small parish church in Berkshire, with her hand on the arm of a man she had known for 6 days, and heard herself become the Duchess of Harrowmere. She wore grey. It was the best of the 3 gowns she owned. He wore black, as he seemed always to wear black, and when the parson had done, and the register had been signed, and the witnesses, Mrs. Poole, who had wept openly, and the solicitor, who had not, had made their marks, he turned to her and said quietly, so that no one else could hear, "I have not asked you what you would have me call you." "Mary," she said. "Mary." He tried the shape of it. "Then you will call me Nathaniel, if you can bear to, when we are private. In front of others, my title is easier. I have found that a title spares people the trouble of a name they were not certain they were permitted to use." "Nathaniel," she said. And she saw, or thought she saw, the smallest thing shift in his face, as though a shutter had opened a 1/4 inch on a room that had been closed a long time. They traveled north the same day. Harrowmere Hall stood on a low rise above a river that had not been running well for years. The house was grey stone, older than its duke by 400 years, with a west wing that had been added under a merrier hand than the present one, and now stood shut up under Holland covers. Mary saw it first from the carriage window, as the light was going, and she understood at once that the letter had not exaggerated. It was a cold house. It was cold, as a house grows cold when the people inside have stopped believing that warmth is a thing meant for them. The staff were assembled in the hall. Mary counted them, without meaning to. 19 indoor servants, 7 of them women, none of them smiling. The housekeeper, a lean woman of perhaps 50, called Mrs. Iredale, curtsied with the exact economy of a woman who intended to give not a farthing more than her office required. Behind her, on the second stair, a small boy stood alone with his hand on the banister. He did not curtsy or bow. He looked at Mary with the still considering look of a creature deciding whether to run. "This is my nephew," said the Duke. "Master Thomas Ashcombe. Thomas, this is your new aunt." The boy did not speak. Mary had not expected him to. What she had not been prepared for was his eyes, which were the same gray as his uncle's, and which held at 6 years old the same absolute containment, as though grief had already taught him what most men learned only in middle life, which was that feeling was a country one did not visit without a passport. She did not go up the stairs to him, she curtsied to him instead. From her full height, and slowly, so that he would see it. "Master Thomas," she said, "I am pleased to meet you. I shall not trouble you tonight. When you wish to speak to me, you will. And when you do not, you shall not have to." The boy blinked. He did not move. But his hand, which had been white on the banister, loosened by a small degree, and Mary marked it, and did not comment upon it. That night, she slept in a room she had not seen before and would not see again, because the Duke had given her the Duchess's apartments, and she had not the strength to argue. She lay in a bed too large for one person, and thought about the boy on the stairs, and the badly pruned rose in Berkshire, and the fact that she had in 6 days become a woman of property, a duchess, a wife, and a stranger to herself, and she had not yet found the moment to be afraid of any of it. In the morning she rose at 5 as she always did, and by 6 she had visited the kitchens, spoken with the cook, ordered fires laid in the drawing-room and the schoolroom and the small breakfast parlor, requested that the curtains in the nursery be opened and left open, and asked Mrs. Iredale for the household accounts of the past 3 years. Mrs. Iredale did not care for this. She said, with the exact civility of a woman lodging a complaint, "Her Grace will find that the accounts are kept by Mr. Hailwood the steward." "Then I shall wish to see Mr. Hailwood at 10. Her Grace understands that in this house—" "Mrs. Iredale," said Mary without raising her voice, "I understand that in this house, grief has been permitted to become dust, and dust to become a habit, and habits to become the walls. I do not propose to break the walls. I propose only to open the curtains and to see the ledgers. 10 o'clock, if you please." Mrs. Iredale, who had expected a stout country widow to weep, was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Yes, Your Grace," in a voice that was, if not friendly, at least no longer at war. Mary saw Mr. Hailwood at 10. She saw the ledgers. She noticed before the morning was out that certain quarterly payments to a certain firm of northern lawyers, described in the books as estate matters, had been made irregularly for 11 years, and always in a hand that did not match the surrounding entries. She noticed further that these payments corresponded, month for month, with the dates on which the late Sir Thomas Vane's income at Vane Hall had been drawn by his cousin Marwood. She did not say any of this to Mr. Hailwood. She thanked him. She asked for a private word with the Duke. The Duke came within the half-hour. He shut the door behind him. He looked at the ledger she had turned open on the desk, and at the small marked column, and at her, and his eyes narrowed in the way she had begun to know, meant he was about to say something short and useful. "Bribes," he said. "Bribes. To keep it quiet, almost certainly." And the same hand throughout. "Whoever wrote it had access to your father's steward's office, and to your father's seal." I should like to send to Mrs. Poole at Ashford House. She kept books for the Dowager for 40 years, and she has an eye. If we can put the same hand to a document Marwood has signed openly, we have him." He looked at her. He looked at her for what she thought was a long time. Then, he said, "You did all this before. Breakfast." "I had breakfast, sir. Nathaniel." Nathaniel. He almost smiled. He did not quite. But she noticed that when he left the room he stopped at the door and turned and said, "Thank you, Mary," and went out without waiting for her answer. And she noticed also that she was holding her breath, and had been for some seconds, and did not entirely know why. She noticed him, after that she had not intended to. It began, she thought later, on the third day, when she came down early and found him in the schoolroom with his nephew, kneeling on the rug, beside the boy's chair, with a small tin soldier in his hand. He was not playing. He was arranging the soldiers in a line, and then knocking them down, one by one, with the careful patience of a man performing a ritual that had once been someone else's game. The boy watched him without expression. The Duke saw her at the door and did not stop. He finished the line and set the last soldier upright again and looked up. His mother used to do this, he said quietly, when he would not sleep. The boy's fingers on the arm of the chair tightened. Mary did not go in. She turned and went down to the breakfast parlor and sat by the fire for a long time before the tea came. She thought about a man who did not know how to grieve for his sister and knelt on a schoolroom rug in the dawn to arrange tin soldiers in the way she had. She thought about a man who noticed a small boy's fingers on a chair. He noticed her too. She learned this by increments. He noticed that she preferred the smaller drawing room to the larger. He noticed that she took her tea without sugar. He noticed that on wet days her knees stiffened, and she moved a little more slowly on the stairs. And after the first such day, a chair appeared on the first landing, and she said nothing about it, and neither did he. He noticed that she read at night by the fire in the library. And one evening she came down and found a lamp already lit at her chair and a shawl she did not recognize laid over the back of it. Soft, gray wool, warm. He noticed the servants' tired hands. He noticed the laughter of the guests at dinner pitched a shade too loud. He noticed her. He had inherited more debts of feeling than of money, and had discharged both badly. Mary understood this before he did. The boy took longer. She did not press him. She sat in the schoolroom in the afternoons with a book of her own, and she read. And she did not require him to speak. And she did not make eyes over him at the nurse, and she did not, above all, refer to his mother without being asked. On the sixth day, she noticed that he was watching her hand as she wrote in her notebook. On the eighth, she noticed that when she left the room, he had moved his chair a hand's breadth closer to hers. On the 10th she found on her writing desk, placed there by no one who would confess to it, a small wooden horse with one ear chipped off, and she understood without being told that this horse had belonged to the boy since infancy, and that its placement upon her desk was a message she was not to answer aloud. She kept the horse. She kept it on the desk where he could see, if he looked, that she had not put it away. 2 nights later at supper, when the Duke was speaking of nothing in particular, and Mary was listening with half an ear, the boy, who had been eating in silence beside her, as he did, reached over and touched the edge of her sleeve. Not a tug. A touch, 2 fingers on the gray wool. He did not look at her. He looked at his plate. Mary did not turn her head. She lifted her hand and without ceremony laid it over his, and left it there for the space of one long breath, and then let it lift away. The boy went on eating. The Duke, who had stopped speaking, resumed, after a moment in a slightly changed voice, on a slightly different subject. Later, when the boy had been carried up to bed and the house was quiet, the Duke found her in the small parlor and said without preamble, How, what, Nathaniel? How did you know not to look at him? Every governess I have had would have looked at him. Because he does not want to be seen doing it. He wants to be permitted to have done it. He is 6, but he has already learned that the world will make more of his small tenderness than it can bear. So I made no more of it than he did. He looked at her. She looked back. The fire in the grate cracked, and something in the room shifted, and he said, quite softly, "You are a remarkable woman, Mary." "I am a woman who has been looked at all her life, sir, and who has learned when it is a kindness not to." Nathaniel. Nathaniel. He did not move, nor did she. And afterward she would think that this was perhaps the first moment at which she had known, not hoped, known, that this bargain had already stopped being one. The nurse, Mrs. Bly, was old, and had known the boy's mother from a girl. It was Mrs. Bly who told Mary at last on a morning of steady rain, sitting by the nursery fire, what the trouble was. "They should never have said it to him," said Mrs. Bly. "But it was said, your Grace, and it was said by a woman who ought to have known better, and it has sat in him ever since, what was said." Mrs. Bly looked at her hands. His mother sang to him. Every night, since he was a babe, old songs mostly, Yorkshire ones. She had a fine voice, God rest her. When she took the fever, she was still singing him to sleep. The night before she took to her bed she was sitting up in his room singing, and she coughed a great deal, and the boy asked her if his singing along was tiring her. And she smiled and told him, "No, love, never." And she died the day after next. And at the funeral, his other aunt, his father's sister, a hard woman I shall not name, said in his hearing that, of course the poor child had worn his mother out with his constant singing, and that if he had only let her rest, she might have lived. She said it to another lady. She did not know he was there. But he was there, and he has not sung since, nor spoken, because he thinks, your Grace, that he sang his mother to her death. Mary was quiet for a very long time. "He thinks his voice is a poison," she said. "He thinks he killed her with it, Mrs. Bly?" "Your Grace, thank you." She did not go to the boy that day, she waited. She thought about it at length. And that night, when Nathaniel came to the small parlor, where she now took her tea after supper, she told him. She watched his face, while she told him. She watched the muscle at his jaw. She watched his hands close very slowly on the arms of the chair. She watched him not weep, because she understood by now that he had not learned how. And she understood also that he would learn, but not tonight. "Which aunt?" he said. "Mrs. Bly will not name her. I shall not need her to. I know which. She is not to enter this house again. That is not a request. It is not a request I would make you moderate." He looked up. "What will you do for the boy?" "Yes." "I do not know yet. I shall find a way to give him back his voice, Nathaniel, but I will not force it. It will take time. He will need to understand that the singing did not kill her. He will need to hear her voice, honored by someone else. He will need to sing again himself, without being asked, and he will need to survive the singing, and see that no one dies of it. That is the shape of it, the doing of it. I shall come to." Nathaniel looked at her a long time. Then he said quietly, "I did not expect you. I beg your pardon. I did not expect you. When my solicitor wrote to say we had found Sir Thomas's daughter, I expected. I do not know what I expected. A frightened woman, a grateful one. A woman who would be persuaded to a marriage of convenience for the roof it gave her, and no other reason. I did not expect you. I am no one remarkable, Nathaniel. You are. I am a large woman of 28, who has been told all her life that she is useful and no more. I know the shape of what I am. You do not," he said. You do not know it at all." He did not say more that night. He rose. He crossed to her chair. He stopped a pace short of it, as though he did not trust himself to be nearer, and he said, "Good night, Mary," and went out. And she sat for a long time with her tea gone cold in her hands. Word can travel a great distance in 3 weeks, and the word that a Duke of the North had married a large plain gentlewoman, found by chance in a Berkshire drawing-room, travelled precisely as fast as such words always travel, which was very fast indeed. It reached London by the end of the 2nd week. It reached Vane Hall by the middle of the 3rd. And on the 20th day of March, 3 days before the hearing was set, a carriage drew up at Harrowmere Hall, bearing Mr. Silas Marwood himself, requesting the courtesy of an interview. Mary was in the library when the card was brought in. Nathaniel was at his desk, reading a paper his solicitor had sent up that morning. They looked at one another. "Show him in," Nathaniel said. Mr. Marwood entered the library like a man walking into a shop he intended to buy. He was perhaps 50, tall, thin, well-dressed, in the manner of a man who had learned late what quality meant, and had never quite mastered it. His eyes moved over Mary with the small, pleased calculation of a man appraising a difficulty and finding it less than he had feared. He bowed. He did not overbow. "Your Grace Duchess, I regret intruding so close to the hearing. I thought it best that we speak all three as reasonable people." "Sit down, Mr. Marwood," said Nathaniel. He sat. "I shall come to the point," said Marwood. "The case before the court, as it stands, will benefit no one. It will consume my remaining fortune and a portion of yours. It will place the lady in a most uncomfortable position, since the codicil, whatever its origins, will require her to answer questions in open court concerning her mother and her mother's marriage, and the years of her upbringing under a name that was not, apparently, her father's. It will produce, whatever the verdict, a scandal that will attach to your house and to hers." He paused, delicately. "I propose a settlement. I will withdraw my petition. The codicil will stand. The lady will receive Vane Hall and its farms. In exchange I ask only that a modest annuity of, shall we say, £600 be settled upon me, in recognition of my 10 years' care of the estate." Nathaniel was silent. Mary was silent. "It would spare us all a great deal, Your Grace, and frankly, forgive me, it would spare the Duchess a public examination in which certain aspects of her present situation might be remarked upon. Society, I am told, has already had a good deal to say about the character of the match. I am told there have been unkind words in certain drawing-rooms. A public hearing will only refresh them." He looked at Mary with what he plainly believed was a sympathetic expression. Mary looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at Marwood. "Mr. Marwood," said Nathaniel very quietly, "Your Grace, you have been drawing £1,100 a year from an estate that was never yours for a decade. You have made irregular payments to a firm of northern lawyers to keep the codicil buried, in sums my wife has identified from your own hand in my father's household ledgers. You have petitioned my court, and it is my court in the North Riding, on grounds you know to be false. You have come here today to threaten my wife with public shaming, to induce her to buy off your crime." Marwood's face did not change, but a small pale line appeared at the corner of his mouth. "I do not think," he said, "that her Grace will find a court very sympathetic to a claimant of her physical description, when the alternative is a quiet settlement." The room went still. Mary did not speak. She was looking at Marwood with the same steady expression with which she had once looked at a smudge of soot on her knuckle in the yellow drawing-room at Ashford House. She noticed, without meaning to, that his cuffs were frayed and that his boots had been resoled and dyed. She noticed that his eyes, when he looked at her, had precisely the calculation she had seen in Lady Ashford's the morning of her going. Nathaniel rose from his chair. He did not rise in anger. He rose the way he did everything, which was slowly and with entire economy. He walked around his desk and he stopped in front of Mr. Marwood, and he said, in a voice that was not raised and did not need to be, "You will leave this house within the quarter hour. You will not address my wife again in your life. On the last day of March you will appear before the court, and the court will find against you, because the codicil is genuine, and the hand on the payments is yours, and my wife has proved both. Whatever remains to you after the verdict will be yours to keep. I shall not pursue you further. I shall not need to. There will be no annuity. There will be no settlement. There will be no more words between us." Marwood stood. He was, Mary saw, very white. "You will regret," he began. "No," said Nathaniel. "You will." Marwood left. The library door closed. Nathaniel stood a long moment with his back to Mary. When he turned, his face had gone through some private weather she had not been permitted to witness, and had come out the other side into a stillness she recognized. "Mary," he said. "Nathaniel." "He said what he said to hurt you." "I could not let him say more." "He did not hurt me." "He tried. He tried. He did not succeed." "Nathaniel, I have been looked at by rooms full of Marwoods since I was 12. His words are not new. What is new is, you standing between them and me. I have not been stood between in anything before." He did not answer. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her chair, and she thought at first. He meant to sit down beside her, but he did not. He knelt. He knelt at her chair like a man kneeling in a schoolroom. And he took her hand very carefully in his own, and he looked at her, and he said, "You are beautiful, Mary. I have wanted to tell you so since the day in the garden, and I have not, because I feared you would think it a kindness. It is not a kindness, it is a fact. You are beautiful, and you are the finest woman I have ever known, and I have been very lonely for a very long time." She did not weep. She was not, on the whole, a woman who wept. But she found her free hand was on his face, and she could not remember having lifted it there. "Nathaniel," she said, "do not say the rest of it now." "Why not?" "Because we have a hearing in 3 days. And I will not have anything you say to me confused by the shape of a courtroom. Say the rest of it when it is over. Say it in this room, or in the schoolroom, or in the garden, when it is warmer. But do not say it here and now, because I will believe you, and then afterwards I shall wonder whether I ought." He looked at her. He nodded. Slowly, he rose. He kept her hand. "In 3 days, then," he said. "In 3 days." The court of the North Riding sat in a plain stone building in the market town of Hereford, and on the morning of the last day of March, it filled with more people than had attended a hearing there in the memory of the oldest clerk. Word had spread. There was a duke, and a disputed will, and a disputed duchess, and a claimant, who had done 10 years of quiet stealing, and there was the possibility of blood on the floor before the day was out, or its social equivalent, which in the North was often more entertaining. Mary sat in the front row on the left. She wore gray. She had refused in the matter of her clothes to be changed by any of it. Nathaniel sat beside her. Behind them, brought north for the hearing, sat Mrs. Poole from Ashford House, who had brought with her the letter she had found in a drawer 3 days before Mary was married, and had held on to since, a letter in Mr. Marwood's own hand, addressed to Lady Ashford's late husband and dated 11 years before, requesting that any enquiry regarding a Mrs. Whitlock be diverted to him personally. The lawyers spoke, the codicil was produced, the handwriting was compared. Mrs. Poole made her statement. The northern lawyers who had received the irregular payments were named. Marwood's counsel, who had plainly been expecting a settlement and had not been furnished with the materials for a defense, went pale as the morning wore on, and paler still after luncheon. At 3:30, the judge delivered his opinion. The codicil was genuine. The estate of Sir Thomas Vane, entailed and unentailed, passed in full to Mary Ann Ashcombe, Duchess of Harrowmere, née Whitlock, daughter of Sir Thomas Vane, by Anne Devereux. The suppression of the codicil was found to have been criminal, and Mr. Silas Marwood was ordered to yield up the estate within a fortnight, and was made subject to a further hearing on the matter of the diverted income. Marwood, who had sat throughout with a face of stone, rose without speaking, and walked from the court, and no one in the north saw him again for some years, though he was said to have gone to Boulogne and died there in a lodging-house of a fever no one troubled themselves to name. That, however, was not the end of the day, because when the judge had finished, and the room was rising, a woman at the back stood up, a lady in the black of half-mourning, older, thin, with the small hard mouth of a person who had spent a life saying cruel things and calling them honesty. She spoke without waiting to be recognized, in the tone of a woman accustomed to a room going quiet for her. "Your Grace," she said, "before we adjourn, I am Mrs. Cavendish, sister to His Grace's late brother-in-law. As you know, I have petitioned separately concerning the guardianship of my nephew, Thomas Ashcombe, on the grounds that His Grace's household, as presently constituted, is not a fit." "Mrs. Cavendish," said Nathaniel, standing, "this is not the place. Not a fit environment for the boy. I understand the child's new aunt has been in residence some 3 weeks. 3 weeks. I make no comment upon her. Upon her origins, which have today been settled to the court's satisfaction. I make comment only upon the fitness of a woman raised in service to be entrusted with the moral education of a." The room, which had begun to breathe again, held its breath. "Mrs. Cavendish," said Nathaniel, in the voice Mary had heard him use to Marwood, "you will sit down." "I—" "Shh,"